what are we actually about? It's to an extent an open question. It's not like the cypherpunks knew it all. Like it's part of our job to continue to try and figure it out. Like we've been given this Arthurian sword or something, like this very powerful thing. And so it's like, what are we gonna do with it? I think that's a big part of our homework.
Oh, what is up, guys? Welcome back to Bitcoin Audible. I am Guy Swan, the guy who has read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. We have got a fantastic show today. Tuur Demeester joins me on the show, and I didn't even realize that we've never actually done a show together until very recently. And Tuur is fantastic if you do not know him. Really fantastic written work that we have done on the show. The links and all that good stuff will be in the description, and we'll talk a little bit about a couple of the pieces actually while he's on the show. But we dive into all sorts of really fascinating stuff in this conversation. We cover a lot about like the halving. We actually recorded this on the day of the halving, so there's a lot to talk about there, and like really kind of dig into, because he and I have both been in the space since 2011. And so we've seen these cycles multiple times. So we kind of took a trek through history on like our perspectives and the ways things were different over the previous halvings and through these cycles and how the market has kind of developed. And then, of course, getting his take on like projecting it out forward, thinking about what the big geopolitical pushes and challenges are going to be in the near future. And where we are in kind of like the big picture view of things. But we dive into an absolute ton of really, really fun stuff. So I won't delay it any longer. I will say, however, that this show is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin and CoinKite and the Cold Card hardware wallet. And one of the really fantastic things right now is Swan Bitcoin. Right now, for the first or if you have an account already, the next $10,000 worth of Bitcoin that you buy in the app is no fees at all. So if literally just go download the app, check it out. If you want to use my link, that would be hugely appreciated. But check out, you can literally set up an account and in probably a couple of minutes start buying. And when you do that, you're going to want to put that shit on your hardware wallet. This is the Cold Card hardware wallet. This is one of my three. I love this little guy. This is essential to actually being a Bitcoiner and actually securing your coins. To know, like, this is why I can actually use this. I can tap right here on my wallet, right in my phone, and I love it. My keys are separated, and no matter what happens to this guy, I am safe. I still have my coins. So check them out, and you can just discount with coupon code Bitcoin Audible. Links and details will be right in the show notes of this episode. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our conversation with Tuur Demeester. Welcome to the show, Tuur.
Yay!
Welcome to Bitcoin Audible.
Yay! Now I can give you the polished version of what I wanted to say. But yeah, I remember the trepidation during 2012 because Bitcoin had never halved before. And so people were a bit worried, like, is something bad going to happen? Is there like a Y2K bug? So it's funny that the big rally came after because there was relief, and also like, oh, damn, like thing is really working. Like we're actually going to cap it at 21 million.
Yeah, that's really funny. I kind of you forget about it in hindsight, like you downplay it because post the event you think, oh, it wasn't a big deal. But you're right. There was. I do remember this. Is it even going to happen? Like, is it going to work? Like, this is like a big change that is supposedly programmed in, but we've never done it before. We don't know what it looks like. And all of the talks, it's also hilarious to see it show up every single halving, is the talks of the minor death spiral.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the FUD every single time, as if last time wasn't worse. You know, like if there was anything that was in which that was going to cause some sort of a serious problem,
Mm.
it was definitely last time going to be worse than this time. You know what I mean? like in
And
hindsight.
it oscillates between the miner death spiral and like the miners as Leviathan that are
Yeah.
gonna like dominate everyone and eat your lunch,
Lots of
and control
contradictory.
the network. I mean, yes and no. It's kind of understandable that people just aren't used to a system actually having balanced trade offs.
Hmm.
So I do think it's probably a part of everybody's learning process to try and explore all the potential risks
Yeah.
and you have to do it for yourself. You can't just take you can take someone else's word for it, but it helps to do a bit of homework yourself.
Yeah. That's the problem with taking somebody else's word for it, is that you end up, I mean, it creates dependency. I mean, this is the whole not your keys, not your coins. This is do your own research, blah, blah, blah. But platitudes set aside, is that it creates weakness in your conviction. You know, like it's sad to see people who will get into Bitcoin based on what somebody else said, or which is inevitable, obviously, but then when things get rough, or you have the middle of a bear market or whatever, they immediately have lost all conviction. They're unsure. Now they don't know. Did I actually learn anything? CNBC said it's going to be bad today, and maybe the gig is up. Is it? You just end up fighting with yourself about whose opinion you should subsume, rather than building your own foundation.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we should be grateful for all this volatility in Bitcoin, because it offers, these like periods of being lost in the desert, or maybe that's the real hardening where, you're just feeling down because the price is minus 70% and you don't know what's up or down, and then either you bail and you leave, or you study, or whatever, you do some soul searching.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of great actually that this huge volatility is here, because it's like it really offers us a lot of opportunity to not just take things for granted and coast, which, because that's one of the problems of the fiat system, is that
Yeah.
like we've just been coasting, like all the volatility has been
Hidden.
supposedly ironed out of the system, because god forbid we have a recession, we got to print money to prevent that. And so in a way it's kind of a, I don't know, it's like a boot camp or something, like
Yeah.
to help you grow more resilient.
Yeah, I actually use that part of the argument for why Bitcoin is unstoppable in my BitBlock Boom Talk 3 or 4 years ago. And I talked about the volatility as like breeding market chads. Humans are anti-fragile. If we don't have stressors, we don't create defenses against those stressors. Like, the fiat establishment is so potently weak in the market and scared to death of any like minor downturn, is because they've leveraged themselves to the end of the earth against the appearance of no volatility. But the volatility is there. The volatility is just dispersed to the real world and hidden in the money through price controls. Like, they just cover it up, and it creates people who are weak against the market. It creates leverage, and it makes it so that, if you do have a 5%, 10% downturn, 10% of the economy is literally obliterated. It's just absolutely ruined, rather than having any sort of a buffer that, like, okay, yeah, Bitcoin goes down 10% in a day, I don't even get an email. Like, I don't like it doesn't even phase me. And the fact that we're actually building a robust market on top of that, like you say, it might be a profoundly good thing, and it forces that self-reflection, because you don't get the benefit of just saying like it's always going to go my way. It's like, no, it's not. You have to
Right.
deal with the fact that it's not going to. And do you actually know what you're talking about? Do you actually have the balls to stand and like put your shoulders back on your position and say, yeah, I'm here for the long haul? And probably one of the most important parts of my journey is that I got in right at that first. Well, I guess it was technically the second, but the other one doesn't show up on the charts. The run up to 30, and then the crash back down to 1. So I got baptized right out the gate.
That's 2011 as well, then.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Beginning part of
Wow,
2011.
that's actually that's
both class
before
of
me
2011.
because I think I vaguely heard about Bitcoin in like April, but I really started reading about it when it on the way down when it was already had popped.
Yeah, that was a hell of a moment, and we went all in at the tippy top and watched it all all disappear. And I basically had that come to Jesus moment of just like, what have I done? Like, am I just a total absolute idiot? Or did I just blindly get into something that was a fascinating idea, but I don't really know anything about it? I mean, that
Well,
was
and
kind
then
of
the
my
cool thing back
conclusion.
then was that like you could either it was like the fork in the road was either you just went with the sentiment and just bailed and sold, or you kind of just went with okay, what's happening here? And the system never failed, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't a systemic failure in Bitcoin. It was just kind of a loss of market confidence, and it was maybe like a corporate failures that were happening in the very early days.
Yeah.
But nothing, and that's why, it was like eventually seeing the dysfunction even in the beginning at Mt. Gox that inspired people like Jesse Powell to start Kraken and so yeah, that's the mindset that we needed, or that one needed, to be able to kind of be on board with Bitcoin. And I think, I mean, at the risk of overly generalizing, but I do think there is some parallels between what we're talking about and the kind of spectrum of political ideology, where you start with free markets and trusting individual autonomy, and then you end up on the other side of total fear and freeze in socialism, where they're so scared they're not even wanting to see the prices. Like, we're just gonna,
Yeah.
everyone is gonna have a job, like, don't worry. It's like the ultimate supposed stability, even though in real life it's a nightmare. But it's interesting to think about it as an ideology of fear, really, where you just fear reality, and so you constantly need to live in a delusion
Yeah.
and utopian promises. Like, oh, it's coming. Like in Chernobyl, in the series, you always see these like utopian slogans around that are just, which was the case. They would hang. I forget what exactly they said, but in the podcast they actually translate them, and it's just all BS. But it's meant to kind of keep people engaged, because maybe the good thing is coming tomorrow. Like, we're building it.
The utopia is about disconnecting from reality and basically overriding it, rather than coming to terms with it, accepting its limitations and building within it, And it's like, those are the two dichotomies. Are you afraid of reality, or are you accepting it and you live within and achieve what you can achieve within it? But yeah, that's interesting, and it's such a great little microcosm between the whole fiat establishment versus Bitcoin. Like,
Right.
Bitcoin is the reality of volatility, of what is actually happening with kind of boots on the ground.
Yeah, and it does not filter the emotions. It's literally just a reflection of the emotional state of the world, is the Bitcoin price. Yeah, it's a perfect dichotomy, and it's no coincidence that central banking was one of the 10 planks of Karl Marx. One of the 10 main tenets of
Pillars of
the
communism.
socialist system. Yeah, is to have a central bank.
In fact, I think it was like pillar 4 and 5 were about banking and money.
Yeah, I think one of them was about abolishing the rights to inheritance. Centralized creditors. Another one, that was the central bank. You may be right. There might be another financial element.
There were a few. It was very clear that it was a critical component to actually making it work. And you think about it from the standpoint, is the whole idea is that you have a state, like a central institution, that's determining what the value of everything is. Therefore, if you have any market escape, it will overtake, because the idea is to hide reality, And there's actually an element to this that I think, I read a piece. Actually, I think it was like a Twitter thread, not too long ago on the show, of why there is such incredible vicious antagonism against Bitcoin in the establishment and political sphere, and that part of it is literally, and Lagarde has said this in no uncertain terms, like quote, if there is an escape, people will use it, and that will prevent us from being able to do our price controls. I don't think she used those words, but from instituting our policy, I think it was something like that. And that Bitcoin is basically it's a canary in the coal mine, so to speak. It's this opening up of, okay, we can actually have pure price signals. And I think it's very telling that we're coming into this space where it's no longer reacting to just like, oh, if interest rates are going up, Bitcoin will go down like everything else. And if interest rates are down, Bitcoin will go up like everything else. We're starting to break out of that. And I think it's an indication of where we are with sentiment. And I'm really curious your thoughts on that kind of perspective of what's happening in let's say this cycle, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Bitcoin is decoupling, and I would say in general, real goods are decoupling from the fiat, more illusionary world, right? Where we have credit money, which is the bond market. We have fiat money, which is dollars and yens and euros, and then we also have what Mises calls fiduciary media, which is like tokens, like IOUs that are only partially covered with real goods that are not completely covered. And this is a stretch, and I'm kind of just riffing here, but I think you could argue that these days owning a home is a kind of a fiduciary medium, like that certificate that says I own a home, because you have been deluded. You have been kind of lied to, even if it's an unconscious lie by the market, that your home is the kind of stronghold of your wealth, or that it's the pillar of what your family can do. Most people are extremely concentrated in real estate in their portfolio. Like they not only do they have a home, but oftentimes they're levered long housing. Like they still owe obviously on their mortgage, and so that means that they're levered long housing.
I'm doing it on purpose. I'm doing it on purpose to not lose Bitcoin. Yeah, but yeah, it makes a
but that's because that the fiat money is going to go to zero, and so it's
a slightly different play.
Right. Well, so there's all this delusion, and I think what's happening, you see, actually, if you look at the charts, commodity charts are starting to break out again. So we had that first wave after 2020, a big run up in all commodities, including Bitcoin, of course. And now there was a lull, and then Biden's administration and all the kind of mainstream economists were like, oh, we have disinflation, so it's kind of everything is fine again, even though the run up in the price we never ran that back. Like the prices are high as they were, except that they stopped growing. So the cancer has stopped growing a little bit. But there's going to be a second wave, and the decoupling is going to continue. And eventually what you get is what Mises calls Katastrophenhoos, I think, or the Flucht in der Sachwerte. So it's like the flight into real goods. And that's what you had eventually in Weimar Germany, where people were just bidding on agricultural equipment, like tractors. There was like a craze for like agricultural equipment.
No shit.
Not because it was so useful, but at least it was something real.
Yeah.
And so we saw the first of that in 2020, where all of a sudden everybody was buying Rolexes and all these weird bubbles like that happened. So that's gonna, I think, exacerbate. But if you want to be safe, you want to buy real goods that are also liquid. And that means they have to be fungible, because if you buy a Rolex, unless it's the exact model that some guy wants, you can basically be stuck with an illiquid good, especially in times of crisis. So what you want is, petroleum claims on petroleum, or you want, like a gold bar or a Bitcoin, of course. Those are all fungible, scarce goods. that means that they will likely have liquidity in a time when, we have this massive readjustments in the economy, and people have to come to terms with the reckoning that there was a giant fraud that's been committed for decades, and finally, we're basically doing cold turkey, right? We are quitting the addiction to illusion, and it's going to be a hard landing.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's kind of like you're watching the reemergence of money, and not just a monetary shift, but the reemergence of money as the most saleable, as the most valued, like long-term asset, because it's not been for a long time. Most saleable, but not the most valued. You know what I mean? Like,
Mises would call it commodity money. Like, this
Mhm.
is the reemergence of commodity money, and you're right. What we had this kind of dark age, the last 100 years, pretty much, where money was weakened so much and poisoned that the economy started adapting by investing in money substitutes and surrogates, money surrogates. And
Mhm.
that's what the real estate bubble is about. That's what the tech bubble is about to an extent. Doesn't mean that the technology revolution didn't happen. Of course it did,
Mhm.
but it's overvalued. Like the price to earnings ratios are way out of whack. So yeah, all these monetary substitutes, once the real money emerges, people turn their heads and they're like, this is the thing. And that's what's slowly happening with this long-term parabolic uptrend of Bitcoin.
This show is brought to you by the Cold Card hardware wallet. My favorite setup, which I know I talk about a lot, is the Nunchuck wallet on mobile that just connects directly to, or just talks NFC whenever I need to sign. The Nunchuck does not hold my keys. It is securely on my Cold Card, not connected to the internet, not vulnerable to a phishing email or any malware or anything like that. If I ever need to send a transaction, I just create the transaction on my Nunchuck wallet, and I tap it to my Cold Card, I hit sign, I tap it again, and then off it goes. There is no easier interface and way of interacting that grants a higher level of security, in my opinion, than that right there. It's genuinely incredible to me that we even have this capability in the Bitcoin space. And CoinKite has just made an entire suite of fascinating security and just fun Bitcoin devices and hardware products, like the block clock. Just connect it to your node and have it show the Bitcoin price, have it show the block height, just right there on your desk in this really cool package. If you haven't checked out what they have to offer, you definitely need to. And when you go over there, do not forget that I have a 9% discount code. Bitcoin Audible, all one word, gets you 9% off. And you can go through the link in the show notes, or just remember the discount code, which is not hard. It's just the name of the show. You can go through the link in the show notes to go right there, or just go to the store, browse around, see what you want, get yourself a solid hardware wallet, experience the tap to send with a Cold Card hardware wallet. It's just kind of magical. And get notified for the Q1. I'm really stoked about my Cypherpunk BlackBerry, the new model that's going to be coming out. So check that out as well. Yeah, don't forget, 9% off. The link is right in the show notes. Go check them out. It's funny how it changes real estate, and it's funny too that real estate kind of, I mean, I guess it's not that funny. It makes a lot of logical sense that real estate became kind of the monetization, the dominant, like essentially the roles of money got separated into a couple of different pockets, because we no longer had one thing to actually serve the whole tower, the whole stack of what money does, right? And so we developed like a handful of store of value commodities that essentially did the job best. Then we created an entire service market for exchange, payments, financial features, all that stuff. And then you have the currency management itself of the authoritative rails of who owns what, the rules side of the money. And real estate is kind of like one of the primary monetized store of values, or stores of value. And yet, like, when you have Bitcoin, your perspective on this totally changes. Like, I think of my house as just a staggering liability. Like I'm not done with the remodel, with all of the things that I want to do with this. Like, I'm still in an unfinished basement, but I'm already some of the things that we did to it at the beginning are already needing repair. Like it's such a short span of time. It quote unquote rots so quickly.
Yeah.
And now when I think about it, and I've talked to my brother about this 100 times, like, I don't want to do like the next house, the house that we build. Like, I'm going to build the whole thing out of rock. Like I want to carve it out of, because I don't want it to be something. If it's not going to be there in 20 years, it's not worth spending the money on, or spending real money, spending real Bitcoin on. And it's so crazy how just a minor incentive shift that ends up with a positive feedback instead of a negative feedback, and how you think about the outcomes of things can completely change your point of view, can completely change all of your behaviors and decision making around.
It's staggering, right? And imagine now, like you and I having this perspective change, and then a couple billion people having the exact same perspective change. Like, this is like world changing. And then it also explains why we walk around in these beautiful cities in Europe and we're just in awe. And at the same time, we have this sadness of like, why don't people do this anymore? And it's really the money. It really explains it. And like you put it so well. Like, I want to build a house out of rock that's gonna last. Because it's true that if you have real money, then you can look at a house as, in a way, more like a spiritual extension of yourself, rather than this kind of haphazard, hasty, I don't know, stuffed animal where you like stuff some cash in, like that like stores some value for you, and
it's a savings account that gets rid of your rent.
Yeah, right.
It's like a weird. I mean, it's thought of as your best investment. It's literally like a 3-in-1 financial tool for people, and people don't even think about it as the. I mean, that's why like a third of luxury apartments in Manhattan sit empty, because it's just a financial tool for the rich. Like, they're not using it as a home.
In China, same in London. Yeah, no, and that's why you had people like Robert Kiyosaki make such huge careers out of just explaining to people a house as a financial asset, like Rich Dad Poor Dad. It was all about like monetizing the situation in the real estate market, and then you can borrow against your house and lever it up and buy more real estate. And and I don't hate the player. He was just explaining the game.
Hey, got to be good at the game that is being played, not the one that you wish. Yeah,
exactly. And he was just adapting, you could argue, but it really changes when you have real money. And you can start thinking about a house as like a safe place for your family, or a legacy that you leave behind. And also like thinking about long term. It's like, I'm not in a hurry to build. So if I do build, let's just do it right.
Yeah.
And there is a really interesting, you might have seen this, but I've talked about it. There's that book that Stuart Brandt wrote years ago, I think in the 90s, about... It's such a simple title, but I always forget it. It's basically looking at houses and housing as phenomena that exist throughout time. And so it's not like, oh, I build a house and it looks nice and that's it. And which design do you like best? That's kind of like an infantile way of looking at a house, because houses exist through time. And so what he does is he looks at photos of houses that were built 100 years ago, and then he sees the ones that survive, like, did they change or how did they change? And it's become very popular, this book, among programmers, because just like an open source program is a living thing, it evolves, it changes over time.
Is it How Buildings Learn?
Yes, exactly.
How buildings learn. I don't know this one. Yeah. Oh my god, thank you.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's really good.
Do this one.
So that's the rough theme of the book, is he just investigates, like, what is it that makes a house live a long life and a healthy life, so to speak. And so he investigates that. And one of the things that he shows in the house is that modern day houses, when you build the house, compared to 50 years later, if you look at how much money you've invested in the house, only the building costs are only a third of the cost, and that's what you were alluding to. 2/3 of the cost over a 50-year time span is just maintenance and repairs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, of course, if you and I start thinking more long term, we're going to want to build a house that's much more durable to begin with. And those are the houses that you see in the countryside in the UK that have been standing there for 400 years with no problem, because they can live through a Great Depression or a war, and the walls keep standing. The only thing you have to do is replace the roof after the 10 years of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
But with modern shacks, honestly, I'd start calling them shacks because they're so thinly built. Once you stop maintaining them for like 2-3 years, they break down. And after 5 years, it's often like they're mortally wounded. You cannot recover them. You have to tear them down and start over.
Yeah.
So they're very, very fragile, these houses.
Have you ever read Strong Towns?
Not yet, but I obviously know a lot of people that
you
have.
would love.
Yeah.
And I was also surprised. I thought it was going to be more, when I listened to an interview with him prior to the book, I thought it was going to be more about assessing like how to like kind of the philosophy of smalling down of hyper like local focus. And it was actually more of the reason why, and going into how we have, and again, it's so crazy. Strong Towns, The Unsettling of America. There's been like 4 or 5 books recently that I have read that are about the consequences of money and bullshit jobs, and they do not have any idea that they're talking about the consequences of money. I love it because they don't know the foundational piece that's causing it, but they do a brilliant job of laying out all the consequences. Bullshit Jobs is a great one. And but all 3 books of those specifically will constantly bring up, like there's at least 4 or 5 times where they hit this thing and I'm like, man, you need to pull on that thread. They bring up financing. They talk about how financing is so easy that it encourages people to do this. And one of the things that he brings up in Strong Towns specifically is how we've completely misunderstood how to think about the profitability of like a space, of like a city or a town or a state, and what is actually sustainable. He said, because we're financing these things. We're financing a house or a new street or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, it looks great when it's new and fresh and we're constantly just going to a new place and building a new thing. But we're financing them for 30 years. And in 20 years, we're going to have to replace everything. We won't have paid them off.
So we're still paying off the old thing while we've already
before we already have to make a
destroyed
reinvestment.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he brings this up a couple of times about that dynamic. And what's funny is what he's talking about is the fact that the price of using up the capital isn't real. Is that we're being lied to. The price of financing is false. If the interest rate was 30%, none of it would happen. We would be maintaining the things that we have rather than just going out and financing and building a new thing. It would completely change our perspective. But it's just because the market is lying to us. Well, the market isn't. The government is lying to us about what the actual cost of using up all this capital is. That's why everything's degrading. And, you know, rather than fixing the inner city, like that inner city to outer city, like to suburbs, is not a natural progression. It's caused by financing because it appears cheaper. It's not, but it appears cheaper to build new at the edge than to fix what is in the middle that is degrading. And it's so crazy. It's fascinating to read these books and hear that little thread
absolutely
over and over and over again.
Right? You're starting to see it with architects and historians on social media that are like lamenting these amazing buildings that were torn down in the 60s and later.
So sad.
And you're starting to see a growth in awareness that it's not just that people in the 60s just lost their minds or that the whole society is totally corrupt in a couple decades, but they're starting to pay more attention to it was just possible for a random developer to outbid a family who had been maintaining a country house in their family for generations, and all of a sudden hit a rough spot. And this developer, because of the cheap interest rates, could just put down massive amounts of money to tear it all down, build a parking lot or some kind of ugly new development. And then the developer didn't have to live in it. He's just flipping it.
Yeah.
So it's that's what Alan Farrington so brilliantly, he calls it the capital strip mine. Like that's how, like, you have all that, that cultural heritage that just gets ground up in the machine of fiat financing. And that's what Bitcoin is changing. It's incredible.
In fact, actually, The Unsettling of America has I'm listening to it again right now. It's been a while. But I'm actually on the chapter right now where he's talking about strip mining and kind of the dynamics there. And it's funny because it seems that he is more left leaning when I listen to him, like probably in like a kind of a cultural sense, like he sees it more of like the market in his mind is more like capitalism or whatever his calls this. Not quite so specifically. He's also, he rails against the left and the right politically. Like he's not actually like aligned with them, but it's just interesting to hear it from his perspective, just because he doesn't have he clearly doesn't have a lot of foundation for where the free market has been diverged from, like he's just kind of calling it the same thing that is kind of the normal thing to call it for whatever the consequences are. And he just does a great job of laying out the trends, the bad trends, and where we're disconnected from so much. And it's a fantastic book.
Are there some examples that come to mind? I'm curious.
Just talking about how like we've moved from financing, and the kind of the foundation of his philosophy is that we have moved from nurturing and actually being connected to the land that we are on to literally isolating ourselves from it. And it's happened at every layer. So it's not even like the farmer doesn't even own their land anymore. The farmer just gets a huge machine, they rent it. And so if all of the soil goes away, it doesn't really matter, because as long as they sort out their financing, that what they had to borrow to start this harvest, we just need to max the output as fast as possible, because everything's a short-term churn rather than a long-term, like it's like, what's the yield of this rather than what's the carrying capacity? What can we sustainably produce from this so that this is an asset forever? It's like, no, what's the flow? How much can we pump out of this as fast as possible? And that our money is explicitly screaming at us to do that. Like at every turn, it's pricing it such that the flow makes more sense from a financial perspective, because real prices aren't allowed to happen. And it's insane to think that Bitcoin fixes that. And that when real prices start to flow, all of this stuff that is actually unsustainable will become financially unsustainable finally.
And the irony is, of course, that Bitcoin is going to be blamed, right?
Yes, of course. It's like, well, yeah, it is Bitcoin's fault because it's fixing shit, so suck it. I wanted to ask, I've got a handful of things that I wanted to bring up with where we are in the big picture of stuff. Because we're at the fourth halving here. ETFs are launched. There's a lot of back and forth. And we've actually already kind of talked about the idea of like, there needs to be an opinion of all sides so that people can kind of beat against it and have the opportunity to self-reflect. In fact, maybe before I precede it, I kind of think it's a defeatist attitude. And I don't see how this is unique or special in any way, but maybe that's not what it is. Maybe it's just caution or something, but that the ETFs and establishment finance has kind of arrived to Bitcoin. And it's like, so many people are immediately like, boom, Bitcoin's controlled. Like, like now we have no hope. The ETFs run everything because, now they're a big part of the market. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on it. Like, I've kind of gotten into it a couple times on the show, but maybe I'm jaded. Maybe I just think Bitcoin is unstoppable and I'm an idiot. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think I'm with you on this. Doesn't worry me, the ETFs. I think that I was looking up some numbers. I think that over 80% of Bitcoin is still custodied by lunatics in their basements.
Yeah.
And that's like all the Bitcoin. Like that's like the 20% is all the Bitcoin owned by government, custodied by ETFs, sitting on shitcoin exchanges. that's only 20%. And of course, we keep on building tools to make self-custody easier. And then there is that kind of self-repairing, self-adjusting mechanism whereby if we do kind of lean a lot into trusting third parties with custody, well, then there's going to be more hacks. And then people are going to learn the hard way that it's not great to have your Bitcoin stored at any of, well, let's take Fidelity out of it, but any of the ETFs means that your Bitcoin is actually stored with Coinbase, which is only insured for like 400 million bucks, which is less than 1% of the value of all the coins that it's storing, which also includes Dogecoin and all that crap. Yeah, so if some Dogecoin guy gets hacked, if they hack the Dogecoin out of Coinbase, that will come out of the same insurance policy as if your pristine Bitcoin from the fanciest BlackRock ETF gets stolen. So basically, it's similar to 2010, 11, where we had one exchange.
Mt. Gox,
everybody's putting their trust into one exchange, and you can kind of tell like it's not going to end well, because it seems like Coinbase, they're not very proactive. They're not going to seek out some like blitzy, amazingly technologically advanced insurance scheme to deal with, what happens when they do get hacked. They're just going to like fingers crossed, we are from Silicon Valley. Kind of gold rush mentality of like, you just keep building and everything works out. So I think this is a train crash waiting to happen. We're going to have a hack somehow in the ETF space. People are going to find out that Gary Gensler is not going to bail you out. Jerome Powell is not going to bail you out. Joe Biden is not going to bail you out. And so, you're going to have lost funds, but you'll already have a taste of the magic that is Bitcoin, and then you're going to want the real deal. Just like a lot of the people that were duped by Mt. Gox, they didn't just leave Bitcoin; they just went back in with more wisdom. So I just see it as like part of the growing up process. It's kind of like teenagers are getting involved, and the metaphor I've used is like, do you want to prevent them from ever driving a car? No. But that if you give them a car at age 15, some of them are kind of drive it into a ditch, So that's kind of how I see that. It's part of the growing up process. It's like more power to them that they're getting involved in Bitcoin. They want to do it this way. And I'm just going to keep advocating for decent insurance for these, giant deposits, for diversification, cheering on Fidelity for doing it themselves. Like, God damn, that's awesome. So it's kind of, it just is what it is. I'm very happy that this is happening.
Yeah, it's going to be really sad to see, and maybe it'll be what pops the bubble, or maybe it will be what everybody thinks pops the bubble, and then it won't. We'll get like a short return to the mean, and then keep running. But I don't see, I hope it happens sooner rather than later, because Coinbase, I cannot believe that's not true. I can't believe it's so hard to accept that multi-sig is so good now. And the ease of that, I have a 2 of 3 multi-sig with my basic wallet that I'm using on Nunchuck with just like my tap signer, mobile, and cold card. And I am protected against like 90% of the typical things that would have caused me problems. Granted, it's because I've had the problems. It's because I've lost keys. It's because I've lost a phone. And I know, what happens when the only reasonable key is on the phone, So I was burned, and I get it now. But an ETF holding billions of dollars, they're clearly coming in from the fiat mindset of, who do I trust? Because from the fiat world, that's the only question.
Yep.
Because if you get hacked, as long as it's somebody with the right authority, with the right permission,
they get bailed out.
They get bailed out, or the payment will get reversed. It's an authoritative money itself. The money only exists by permission. So somebody can't really withdraw it, you can't withdraw $30 billion in cash and then not have access to it if a bank gets wired, gets a bunch of money pulled out. But it's so crazy. It's so crazy because they're going to get burned so hard, and they don't realize that this is a different thing. Like, you can have genuine security. Like, you can have real safety, and stupidly easy. Like, you should invest $200 in figuring this shit out. Just hire a Bitcoiner, for Christ's sake. And they're just like, yeah, we're gonna push $30 billion into a Coinbase wallet. And
even the idea of storing it with a company who is so distracted by 5,000 shitcoins.
Oh my God, I know.
Right?
I know. Yeah.
And like, remember their Degen video that was like 4 years ago? Like, they were like going all in on like the Degen trading and NFTs, and it's like, even if all that stuff is valid and real, whatever, but it's kind of like, I don't know. It's like you're letting your gold coins be created by the same guys that are also running like a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant and a repair car shop, and it's all like, what? Don't you want some focus? That's why we like the Swiss. Like, like these guys, they just do one thing, they do it right. They've been building watches for 100 years. That's the only thing the company does. That's the kind of business you want to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, you want somebody like hyper focused on it, because I had a friend of mine, a guy I've been working with on house stuff, really smart dude, and he's interested in Bitcoin, but he didn't go to Swan or River or whoever like I told him to. I was like, just go to some Bitcoin only company, and I gave him my link, and he apparently went to Coinbase because I'm sure he forgot, and then at some point, like, he's like, oh yeah, Coinbase is the Bitcoin thing. And so he got interested in it again. And he got sold. He showed me his wallet because he was having trouble. And he was like, I can't figure out how to get rid of this. And they put like 3 or 4 shit coins in front of him. And he ended up buying like $1,000 worth of rally token, some ERC20 thing. And he can't get it out because they delisted it. So it's in his wallet and he can't do anything with it. So he's
Can he withdraw it?
He can withdraw it, but he doesn't know how to do a wallet. So I'm literally having to do it for him, but it's just like, this company, man, like, these guys are holding like all of the ETF balances. And
I remember, the way they rose to prominence with Bitcoin custody is that they acquired Xapo, XAPO, and that was a Bitcoin only custody company, and that's part of why they got a lot of Bitcoin in the beginning, because that was kind of their thing. We're like the Fort Knox of Bitcoin. But I remember doing due diligence on Xapo as best I could, and it wasn't that impressive. Like, they weren't, that's different from like a BitGo. Like BitGo, like, those are like hardcore technology guys. And of course they also custody, they know how to custody a lot of the altcoins and stuff, but at least, they have that like engineering DNA. Well, Xapo never had that. And then that is the pillar of custody that Coinbase like built itself on. It's just an accident waiting to happen. I know we probably sound arrogant, like imagine some Coinbase investor listening to this conversation, like, it probably sounds like, some like salty Bitcoin OGs that are like, oh, Coinbase. And like, meanwhile, Coinbase has been crushing it for 10 years, or 12 years. But I guess I feel like as my response to that would be that we've seen these accidents happen in the Bitcoin space because of similar reasons. Like, we're not focusing on Brian Armstrong because we have a personal vendetta with him. It's more like we're even like, think about where we are now. Like, Bitcoin is worth $1 trillion. Once we have another rally, even just the ETF money that Coinbase is storing, like, imagine it going to like $300 billion under the custody of Coinbase. That means nation states are very interested and eager to start attacking this company.
Yeah.
Like, to try and get in there. Like, like get hired, like, have literal spies get hired by Coinbase to get up the chain, to get closer to the cave
keys.
of Alibaba,
Yeah.
So, that is phenomenal threats. And so to me, it's like, I just don't see somebody with a mentality of like Silicon Valley, yoo-hoo, that I don't think they're gonna make it. Like you want like a Bitfinex, like they've been hardened.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And they've been, no, I agree. And they've been hardened because they have had that happen. I think that's one of the big problems with Coinbase. Is they have not really been hit the way that they have been to the degree that they've been relied on. And like going back to your example of, Coinbase investor might, say this sounds crazy, but you can take out any name, any person, doesn't matter who you stick in it. The situation of the systematic security and the key and profile of how Coinbase, like, that's the thing, is that, again, that's a fiat mindset. It's not about who it is. It's not about like if they're important enough. It's about the fact that this is the very explicit and singular means by which this is being protected and how it is being protected, and is all in one place. And that is a terrible security profile. That is a huge attack vector, and it's not being fixed. And they don't even seem to act like it's an important thing to fix. Like maybe they'll wake up, but
yeah, that's the thing, is that, like, in my experience, like once a cultural tone is set, it's just extremely hard to change. Like you can't change a culture. You just have to usually start anew, especially if it's like, of course, a healthy culture can become unhealthy, but if it's unhealthy in a certain respects from the start, it's really hard to fix. And you see it again, like the lack of focus on engineering. You see it in the promise to implement Lightning. They've been promising it for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they've done it.
Is it not even? I don't even know. Does Coinbase have Lightning now?
I don't think they have. I remember they promised it. And then also they're what is it called again, when you bundle together addresses, when you try to like clean up your dusts?
Oh yeah, their dust situation is still a complete mess. Yeah.
And people actually attack them using that, right?
Yeah.
People will what is it again? They will deposit dust with Coinbase and then withdraw bigger chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So then leaving Coinbase with the problem.
Yeah. And there were a couple of times, if I remember correctly, people were assessing, like showing like withdrawals and stuff for how and this is like their fundamental back end, like their whole UTX management system that's running automatically. So every day they don't fix it, it gets worse, and they were withdrawing, and they were like using like the fee for the cost was like more than the withdrawal because of how many UTXOs were being pulled together. And like there've been so many times of people like just trying to map it out and just being like, this is a mess. Like it can't even be unraveled at this point. Like there's a lot of useless UTXOs now under Coinbase that are going to cost more than the actual sats that are there to even do anything with. So they're just kind of like sitting there festering, and it's only going to get worse if they don't fix it. So
yes, honestly, I think one of the biggest risks, if we want to talk about risk for the whole ecosystem, is that like Coinbase gets hacked, and then the US government is like, look, these guys are custodying $500 billion or $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. They're too big to fail. We need to take over.
Yeah.
And that Coinbase kind of becomes the first central bank of Bitcoin. That's how, I think the Bank of England started as a private bank, and then it was like deemed too important.
Yeah, that's typically how it goes.
I think even the Bank of Amsterdam, you could argue, was first a private bank and then kind of turned into a public bank.
Swan Bitcoin has the full suite of Bitcoin financial services. You can instantly buy, with your bank account or wire transfer, any amount of Bitcoin up to $10 million worth. And you can easily set up what I have been doing for ages, which is an automatic purchase of Bitcoin on a weekly or monthly basis. You just pick your time frame and then automatically withdraw it to your cold storage. And still they have free withdrawals to self-custody, which I was sure would be gone by now. But you should always treat any custodian as a point of failure. And luckily, you won't have to go anywhere for all of the information and advice you need for why you should withdraw and how to do it safely, because Swan Bitcoin has all of the resources you need and will regularly remind you. About 80% or more of their customers automatically withdraw their coins. That is an amazing feat, if you ask me. Then they also have the Swan IRA if you have a traditional IRA and you want to get it allocated to Bitcoin. And there's so much more. With Swan Private, they have inheritance planning. You also have Swan business accounts, and you can even do Bitcoin as a part of your employee benefit plans. They have an advisory. They have the Swan Vault, a multi-sig service for those who want to have the benefits of holding the majority of their keys, but still also want to be able to rely on a trusted institution in the case of an emergency or a disaster. If you haven't started into Bitcoin yet, Swan is an amazing place to begin. Go to swan.com/guy. The link will be right there in the description. Again, that is swan.com/guy. And they will know that I sent you, and my beautiful face will be right there at the top of the page to greet you. I am a longtime user myself, and a huge thank you to Swan for supporting this show, and I definitely recommend you check them out. You know, it's like the roads. Government took over the roads when the roads became the most important network of the country, right?
Isn't it funny that there's this history which people don't know about, because obviously they're not going to teach it in school, but like in the UK, they actually had terrible roads for a long time. And eventually the government started allowing private landowners to levy tolls.
Mm-hmm.
And so incentivizing them to actually build good roads. And then after all the roads were built, the government was like, all right, guys, it's ours now.
We're going to renationalize.
But who will build the roads?
Who will take over
Same
the roads?
Same with the railways, the railway tracks.
Yeah.
The government never built them. It was like the private market who built out hundreds of miles of railroads around the world. And then the government came in and was like, hey, guys, this is a great way for us to do some rent seeking. Let's nationalize this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about when it becomes important and a source of power that the government then dominates. And then suddenly we all forget that you can do it without them. Speaking of,
all the Bitcoin infrastructure is privately funded. Yeah.
Oh, it will be, well, who will run the Bitcoin? One day in like 7 years, like, but who would run Bitcoin? Who would keep Bitcoin?
Who would run a node?
Who would run a node? Nobody would do that.
Like some mountain man somewhere.
And we're just the crazy psychos. You're just like, oh yeah, he lives out in the mountains by himself. He runs a solar panel with a node and a satellite. Freaking weirdo.
That guy does transactions on the blockchain. Like, can you imagine?
What a weirdo. On that note, can gold become 2.0? I mean, excuse me, can Bitcoin become gold 2.0? Is that going to happen? What's the...
Well, you're comparing gold with what gold? Because gold today or gold the way it was?
Captured gold.
Yeah.
Gold today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, 10 kilos of gold is the kind of parity when the Bitcoin market caps is going to be the same as the gold market cap. So we're now at 1 kilo of gold, more or less. I think it's like $70,000 Bitcoin is about 1 kilo of gold. And so, because you can say like, oh, when we hit $600,000 Bitcoin, then we'll be at gold parity. But you don't know that because the gold price might change in the meantime, might go up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier to think about 10 kilos of gold for one, so 10,000 grams for one Bitcoin.
What market sentiment has to happen for, like, do you think we're in a place where people are starting to change their perspective of Bitcoin enough that it could basically dominate the position in the mind of society, so to speak, that gold has held?
Yeah, I think gold only in China and India still has like an important status. Like I think the status of gold in the West has really gone by the wayside. It's only kind of symbolical or historical, and of course it's in the proverbs and as good as gold, or all these sayings that we still have. But I think that just from a market perspective, like it's actually no coincidence that we're hitting resistance now in Bitcoin at 1 kilo of gold, because in the previous bull market, gold also stalled at 1 kilo twice in 2021, 2022, and now again we're at that same level. And I think there is some psychology there where once we go above it, it'll be like, it'll open up people's minds. Like, I never thought this was possible. Just like with $10 resistance, $100 resistance, $1,000 resistance, it's similar. It's a people just think like Bitcoin could never go above 100,000.
Gotcha. Yeah. We're hitting the resistance there, and it's funny too. A good friend of mine will message me every now and then. He invests in gold. Invest in Bitcoin. And so, he buys some, he sells it if it's like way up, and if it's down, we end up chatting again. It's just like one of those, like, he's at arm's length. It's just another thing that he can put some money in, like a stock. He puts some money in Apple sometimes, Bitcoin some other times. And it's funny, he'll talk about how, like, my perspective is very odd. And he, messaged me out so long ago. He's like, so are y'all going to take some off the table? What'd you do? It's like, we're back at the all-time highs again. It might be done. Might not go up anymore. You've got a great opportunity. And I was like, well, I like bought $10,000 worth today. And he was like, at the high, you're crazy. And like, I would go through my perspective. I was like, listen, the only difference between your perspective is mine is you're measuring it in dollars, and I measure what I want in Bitcoin. Like, I'm not getting rid of what I think of as better money to get lesser money. And I don't see how, I feel like this is just getting started, because people like I'm not exiting. I'm not looking for an exit. I just kind of went through the whole spiel, and I was like, I'm on a Bitcoin standard. Like, if I have dollars, it's to pay bills. And if I have more than bills at the end of the month, I put it back into Bitcoin. And he's just like, that's an odd way to see it. I think you should diversify a little bit, but okay, I got it. And then we just go off talking about other things. But it's funny that, I think that will start to shift the more and more, like just a pure Lindy effect, just a pure, like, there are people who are, about to be 15 years old, kids who grew up and Bitcoin didn't exist.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And also, like, to those kids, imagine what it's like to hear some like serious global macro fund manager talk about the markets and how you should rebalance and long short and and then his performance is like, I don't know, 12%. And meanwhile, like what Michael Goldstein says is like me, like, eating a steak, just like looking at my Bitcoin balance, I'm up 300% for the year. It's like that. That's what these 15-year-olds see.
Mhm.
It's just like, of course, we can't assume at some point it'll saturate, right?
Mhm.
Bitcoin will have some saturation, but still, you have natural deflation. And so then you'll just be more critical of business opportunities. You'll be like, only if I can get like a 50% return or something is this interesting, or a Bitcoin denominated return, of course. And you just bide your time. You're more like a hunter who's just laying in wait, and maybe once a day or once every couple of days he'll like shoot a buck, instead of I don't know what the equivalent is today. It's a lot less precise, that's for sure. It's like using a bazooka to try and get a mosquito.
Bazooka to shoot into a flock of bugs.
Right, and then you eat bugs.
And then you eat bugs. Was it actually your tweet? Who was it? There was something recently. I went on social today and I saw something. Somebody was talking about, like, I did this and I didn't eat any bugs to do it. Like, maybe it wasn't you, it's somebody else. But
no.
On a different point in regards to gold, like, so I think I'm 100% on the same page. I think I wonder even if it competes with gold from a market cap perspective in quote unquote this cycle, and if this cycle is a lot longer than usual. Like, I expect it to kind of stretch out, and I think we might have multiple periods of over leverage and deleverage because people expect it to do something that it's always done, and we are entering a new place. Like, I think it's like Hong Kong or Singapore. I can't remember exactly. Oh, no. Is it Japan? I don't know. Some the new ETFs are launching in other countries, and I think that kind of precedent and the buildup of that around the world and the establishment of it as a genuine financial tool and, part of what should be a normal investment portfolio is going to be a very, very quickly self-reinforcing philosophy. Like if we start getting 2%, 3% allocation in like normal portfolios, like I don't think people really understand what that is going to mean for the price. And we don't really have a good corollary to see
I
it.
mean, yeah, like think of global assets as like 500 trillion. Bitcoin is 1 trillion. Like there's not a lot of that 500 that has to flow into Bitcoin to make it really stand out and explode.
To make it 10 without really breaking a huge sweat,
No, and we haven't even talked about sovereign wealth funds or insurance companies or central banks or, you name it. Yeah.
On that same trajectory, so to speak, though, can Bitcoin be captured like gold, do you think? Do you think we end up in a place where the 21 million is meaningless because it's all in custodians or it's all in banks and it's all permissioned? Like, do you think it could have the same life cycle or the same fate as gold has today?
I will have 8,500 word paper on that to offer you soon.
Oh, love it.
I just literally finished
Love
it yesterday.
Love
I
it.
can give you the title. The title is at least the draft title. It's called On the Felonious Origins of the Business Cycle and Whether a Bitcoin Standard is Its Cure.
Okay.
And of course, the last part is talking about, life on a Bitcoin standard and will we have business cycles? Part of the cause of a business cycle is actually the money being kept hostage. Like the commodity money is kept hostage, and then the issuing institution can just expand on top of that, tell lies on top of their stash of real money. And I think it's a lot less likely on a Bitcoin standard because self-custody is so much easier, first and foremost. That's a big difference with gold. I'm trying to actually, let me actually go to the arguments where I have them.
This is perfect. You should send it to me. There may be audio for it.
Oh, yeah,
in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah. I always love when you do an audio take. Fractional reserve. Yes, Bitcoin doesn't require third parties. A transparent ledger allows for proof of reserves, which is a big one too. I mean, we have today Bitfinex, Kraken, OKX, and BitMEX and Bitstamp all provide proofs of reserve, which creates competitive pressure, right? Because the exchanges that don't do it, all of a sudden they're kind of like, looked at with skepticism. Like, what are you guys, like emperors without clothes? Like, what's the deal? And then finally, multi-sig custody gives Bitcoin savers options. That's a really big one because you have that like in-between space, which is the perfect marriage of institutional and individual that makes third-party custody kind of obsolete. Like you just have key managers, but you don't have to trust them to actually hold your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Even insurance companies that are going to insure the Bitcoin, they don't even need to have full control over your Bitcoin either. Like they can just kind of have a veto on whether or not it can get spent. But that doesn't mean that they need the power to allocate it to themselves or spend it in general. So it's quite wild. Like people have to adjust to all of this. And I think if you accept all three of those points, you know that Bitcoin cannot be captured.
Yeah.
But we do need the culture of vigilance. Like that's the one thing. Like if we all get really lazy, then of course.
Yeah, it will still the ability to leverage will still be there. And I think the larger the fiat market is in relation to Bitcoin, the easier that leverage will be. But I think as Bitcoin becomes larger, 5 trillion, 10 trillion, the ability to price that leverage without it being priced in relation to Bitcoin risk. When Bitcoin is a $10 trillion asset and everybody knows that you can easily put your capital there, going back to the whole antagonism because you can't enact your policy if Bitcoin's in the room with you, is you can try to make that 4% interest rate with as much policy decision as you possibly can. but the boots on the ground interest rate will be the 30%, cost, the trade-off of not being in Bitcoin. So basically I agree. And what I was hitting on was that I think not being able to, if there is more capital outflow, like if there's the bigger the pipe is between Bitcoin and fiat, the harder it is for them to maintain a lie about the price of interest, about the cost of capital over time. But what's interesting there is, from the context of like, can Bitcoin be captured? One thing, aside from all of the tools about like multi-sig, like all of the points that you mentioned, I think there's a really important element that's actually kind of results in those things. It's like a little bit below, whether like if we're just making a direct comparison to gold, and it's that gold, the custody of gold and Bitcoin scale reverse. It's easy to custody like $200 worth of Bitcoin. I mean, $200 worth of gold. It's impossible to custody $200 billion. It's impossible to settle $200 billion of gold. And if you can't move $200 billion out of a market, you can't call the bluff on a fake price, on a price control. It's specifically the liquidity of what can move. You can move $1 trillion in Bitcoin if you have the market cap for it, like that. And in fact, the bigger it is, the easier custody is. The more it doesn't matter that you have $1 trillion.
That's a great point.
Because you got like a $2 transaction fee, you got $1,000 transaction fee. Who gives a shit? So you can move $8 trillion in the Bitcoin ecosystem in a matter of minutes with real settlement. When Russia couldn't own any of the bonds or the gold that they owned, when they were in a contentious relationship with the U.S. Like, that dichotomy there is massive, and it specifically scales to the amount of capital being used, which means that the more capital that Bitcoin is doing, the more it is able to protect it. The less capital you have in gold, the more you are able to protect it. The more you have no security whatsoever.
Yeah, you put like you sew a coin into your shoe or something.
Exactly. But there's the government doesn't care about that. That's not a settlement risk. That's not going to mess up their interest rate price controls.
Yeah.
But 24 words in your head with $30 billion, that ruins all of their plans. Very quickly ruins all of their plans. And that's just a handful of people with enough. There's a fantastic, even like we talked a lot about how Coinbase is in a terrible situation, right? And that they're, prone to a disaster. But think about it. They have more control over their funds than Russia did, than a world superpower did over their reserves, over the capital that's supposedly allocated to them. Coinbase, if they actually had a proper setup, could technically give the middle finger to the United States government and keep the capital safe. There's a very interesting and unique power dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. If they would have multi-sig on multiple continents or something, and reliable people. That's absolutely true. Because if you think about how the gold market works, like part of why there's so much conspiracy theories on the gold price is that there's some factual basis, is that the London Bullion Market Association, they settle all the large transactions in gold, and it is in London, and basically all the big banks store their gold there, and then it gets, just on a ledger, it just gets shuffled around. But, that stuff is very opaque and hard to audit. And it's the same with central banks. Like the last time Fort Knox was audited was supposedly in 1953. Even that one is a little bit shady. Like it wasn't that clear if everything was really there. I think they didn't actually take down all the numbers of the bars and stuff like that. So there's just, it's a lot less efficient.
Even the existence of the gold to compare is in question.
Yeah. Well, because we have no idea what the total supply of gold is.
Yeah, no idea.
And that's been the criticism of systems like Monero, where it's like, oh, but we're very privacy focused. Like, okay, but if you don't know your total supply, how do you know if there's not an inflation bug somewhere or an inflation attack where people create more Monero?
Yeah. And not being able to see that's a trade-off. that's a trade-off, you know? So I don't want to hold you too long, especially if your wife is getting on a plane. But I did just want to maybe close this out with what do you see as Bitcoin's current biggest challenge in the next couple of years?
I would rather say I'm more thinking about Bitcoiners rather than Bitcoin, because I
Okay.
think Bitcoin is fine. Bitcoin
Okay.
is fine. Like, of course, we can all get very hasty and want to merge something into it that Bitcoin is not ready for. But I
Hmm.
think that Bitcoin will just resist that, and it'll just kind of ossify. And there's only room for probably a few more soft forks, maybe if that. So I think Bitcoin is fine, but yeah, it's us. We have this cultural heritage that I think is very important to the cypherpunk values and really this the whole culture that we have. And if we give away our Bitcoin too fast, or if we allow ourselves to be, to say it with Gavin's word, bamboozled, uh, or hacked or whatever,
Hmm.
or not to take care of ourselves and our families, in terms of like where we live in the world, and be realistic about how the legal situation changes. We the risk is that we kind of allow this system of values to be diluted, or to be lost, or to be forgotten. And I think it's so precious, that
Yeah.
that is the most important thing. It's like we have the knowledge, like we have the code is there, and I think the infrastructure is going to keep working. And I hope I don't insult any engineers, because of course we need to keep building out all the practical applications and the wallets and the systems and insurance and everything. That's crucial. But I think also, in terms of like what the public at large, like what is there, speaking, because I assume this is a broadcast for Bitcoiners. I guess one of the challenges for me, which sounds maybe ironic, but because I do so much like talking publicly and all that, is to
Hmm.
not isolate, is to actually ask for help if I need it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
really. I think there is an aspect of community that is important that we maintain and build, and so I really always try to think like, if there's a controversial person, is like, I don't like to expel just very, very quickly. Like, I think
Hmm.
sometimes it's necessary because a person is just consistently damaging over a long period of time.
Hmm.
But I think often there is something redeemable about a person, and they add a lot of value in a certain respect. And then maybe you're skeptical about other things. But so I don't know. I'm not really sure what exactly I'm saying, but there is something about, I think that's why sometimes people say online, like, why would you go to a Bitcoin conference? Like, it's a waste of money. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's really important to connect on a physical level, like where everything online is kind of precarious. Like all these social
It's
media
fleeting.
platforms,
It's fleeting.
honestly,
Yeah.
yeah, but it can be shut down as well. Like if we're
Yeah.
realistic,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
be
For sure.
censored, shut down, you name it, and also it is. You're right. It is more fleeting. Um,
And you talk to people differently online if you've had a conversation in person with them.
yeah,
You do. You just do.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and
So that's my
yeah.
thing. Is like there's something there with the culture and the community, and also like continuing to figure out like what are we actually about.
Hmm.
It's to an extent an open question. It's not like the cypherpunks knew it all. Like it's part of our job to continue to try and figure it out. Like what is we're in a way we've been given this like Arthurian sword or something, like this very powerful
Yeah.
thing. And so it's like, what are we gonna do with it?
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of our homework.
And we can only really hone our values in contest. Like it's only really conflict that brings up the edges and gets us to redefine. Like that's why I really value contrarian opinions just
Mm,
in general, because
mm,
it's kind of like the example of like somebody who becomes famous or well known for something is they get surrounded by yes men and everybody just agrees with them, and then you see them kind of degrade. Like, and then like, like if they're a great movie director, suddenly like their movies get crappier and crappier because everybody just does what they want. If they don't surround themselves with people who will be like, that's a dumb idea, like, because at the end of the day, we're all people. And the whole point, like values is a journey, like trying to understand things is a process. And if you shut down the conflict, which enables the process, you just isolate. You isolate and you rot, you stagnate, atrophy.
I think I was confused for a moment because but now I understand that at least for me, where you say conflict, I would probably say dialogue or something where it's like, as long as we're talking, we don't
same
have to
thing
agree
in
on
the
everything.
filmmaking context. Dialogue and conflict are the same. So I'm using it like a filmmaker, but yes, dialogue is the way. Yes,
I see. No, I absolutely agree,
Yeah.
and that's why that's why it's so important that the whole free speech debate is so important to us as well, because we need to be able to disagree. Like we need an arena. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, that's a good one to end it on. Go spend a minute with your wife before she leaves. Dude, thank you so much for joining me. We'll have to do this again if you're up for it. Of course. Send me the link 100% for the piece. I would love to dig into it.
Also, we should do it in person once, of course, now that we've said all this.
Of course. Yeah. For real. Are you going to be in Nashville?
No, but I will be in Prague and possibly
Lugano.
Yeah.
I will be at Lugano. 100%. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be talking there. So I will definitely. And I'm in Prague. It's still on the table, but it's iffy for me. But maybe I'll see you in Switzerland.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Or the U.S. Good old U.S.
Or the good old U.S.
Yes.
Dude, thank you so much, man. And
pleasure.
We'll close it out.
Pleasure, guy.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Had a fantastic time with Tuur, and always just a wealth of knowledge. I will have links to all of the various reads, the pieces that we have done of his on the show, plus everything that we have talked about in this. My AI does in prompting and everything does a great job of pulling out all of those links. So it should all be there. And so specifically the books, there's just a wealth of other things to actually explore. And Tuur is a fantastic follow. I'll have links to his Twitter, all of his other platforms and everything to reach him. So with that, we will close this one out. Thank you guys so much for listening. Do not forget to subscribe. We have some really cool things coming. Don't forget to check out AI Unchained if you're curious about my workflow and how I'm using AI to streamline the podcasting work. And then, of course, a huge thank you to our amazing sponsors, Swan Bitcoin, the best place to buy Bitcoin, which has no fees on the next $10,000. So check it out if you haven't. And then also CoinKite and the Cold Card hardware wallet, which I love this little baby and makes me feel very warm and allows me to sleep easy at night. So check that out. Discount Bitcoin Audible. Everything will be right there in the description of this episode. So unbelievably convenient. I just want to say, you are welcome. You are welcome. Thank you guys. Till next time, take it easy.